for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.
Good evening and welcome to Your Right to Know by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Mary Lotze and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight joining me is all my friends and a very interesting panel that we're going to discuss the post-election wrap-up. And this is really an exciting show for all of us. We've got a lot to talk about. I will introduce Justin Brooks from Leominster, Kathy Goguen from Fitchburg, former Mayor Dan Mylott from Fitchburg, Frank Ardinger from Leominster, and again, my name is Mary Lotze, and we're here for Your Right to Know. Well, we had a big night on Tuesday. Some people will think it's great, some people will think it's not so, but I think sitting around our table here, the consensus of our opinion is that it was very good. So why don't I open up by just asking you what you thought of the results of the election, nationally and locally.
I think expected, I think would be the word that sums it up a little bit. I kind of thought that, you know, especially in Massachusetts, when you look at like the big Republican wave that hit the rest of the country, which I knew it was going to hit here, it's a little bit tougher to do in Massachusetts. And when you had, you know, Charlie going to be winning at the top, we've had a history of being able to vote in a Republican governor. But, you know, a lot of the, whether that transcends to the local races, the constitutional offices, I didn't quite see that, you know, they don't get as much play as the other races, and I think people just go with what they know, which is voting Democrat in a lot of ways, or they just leave them blank, you know, so that really affected that.
Kathy, how about you?
I think in Massachusetts, being such a blue state, any Republican win is a good win.
Oh.
And we did pick up some additional seats on Beacon Hill, and some women winning other offices like Stephanie Fatman. So you know, you have to sometimes go in baby steps, and I think as long as you can start getting people in there, and I think with Charlie in Boston, I think maybe that will help us too. But you have to start somewhere.
Dan?
Well, I think the most important thing that we did on Tuesday was show the rest of the Republican Party where the strength of the Republican Party really is. And it's right here in central Massachusetts.
Yes.
And it's about time people realize that we are the reason why the Republicans won in Massachusetts.
Frank?
I have to agree with Dan, because without the Worcester County vote, Martha Coakley would be our governor today. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And also what Kathy was saying is, you know, making small incremental gains in the House and in the Senate are important, because that's what we have to do in order to eventually, you know, change this whole state from blue to red. We picked up 8 House seats and 2 new Senate seats. Not big, but with a Republican governor and a little bit more clout in the House, maybe Charlie Baker can make a difference in the next 4 years.
A couple things struck me. I really expected, especially watching the other states come in, I really expected Charlie Baker to have done better. I really wanted Charlie Baker to, the win to be so pronounced that by 8:05 we were going to get, you know, the networks calling a Charlie Baker win. Obviously it was not to happen. Now some of it is because of the cities, the big cities went for Coakley. But were any of you surprised at that? Or was it just me that we had to really wait until after midnight to hear that Charlie Baker won? Granted, then Ms. Coakley didn't even want to announce that she had lost and stepped down. But what do you think? Do you think it should have been quicker?
The Democrats have always had a strength in getting out the vote. That's always been their key to winning elections, and they did it again this time.
Yes.
You know, Martha Coakley was on TV Monday, and she was bragging about how many door knocks they did over the previous weekend. And to see that happening, you had to have some concern that, you know, that it may not go the way we expected it to. But in the end, Charlie's hard work and his reaching out to the people and touching, the people, especially in the inner cities where, where typically we don't do as well. He was in there talking to the inner cities and, maybe minimize the amount of loss that we had in those big cities,
I think that Charlie Baker did a great job in reaching out to the people of the Commonwealth.
Oh, he did.
Much more than he did 4 years
Yes.
ago. And he was not afraid to go anywhere. He was in Boston, he was in Worcester, he was in Springfield, as well as all of the towns around. And he was not afraid to be out there with his hand outstretched asking for their vote.
Right.
And I think that made a big difference this year.
We were talking about it this morning, and Justin,
Yeah, I mean, I looked at this a little bit different way. I mean, I know you mentioned how this might be a referendum on Deval-Patrick. And I didn't see that at all. I think you alluded to that, and I disagreed. I think that what worked for Baker was he became, especially since the last election, a visionary candidate. He had a vision of where Massachusetts needed to be. And when people went to the ballots, they looked at what Coakley was bringing to the table in a lot of ways, and she wasn't really, it was almost like, hey, keep the things going that they are, talking about issues that aren't really that big of an issue. Like, you talk about women's rights. We have a pretty good record of women's rights here in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So when you start talking about that, it only goes so far, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you talk to Charlie, he was talking about a lot of things that we could do better. He had a game plan.
Yes.
People could buy into it. And one of the things that he did especially well was he started to bring out his personality. Like if you looked at his commercials, they were very, they were with his family, they're very comfortable. Martha had a few of those feel-good ones, but there was a lot more attack ads. And I think when people looked at, because Charlie had some too, when you looked at that nice balance between the two, you got a good picture of what Charlie was really about.
I thought it was very interesting. Charlie's personality really did come out.
He was much less reserved
Yeah,
this time.
and
he was more open, he was more outgoing, he was friendlier this time.
Yeah.
And I think that translated to people liking him, whereas Martha Coakley, she may be a very nice person, but she comes across as very stiff.
We saw it a lot at the Johnny Appleseed Festival in Leominster just a few weeks ago when Charlie Baker came to town. I mean, he walked down Main Street and onto Central Avenue or whatever that, right by the Common. I mean, he was swarmed with people, and everyone wanted the photo op. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. Everybody wanted to be in the picture with him, and he obliged. And I think that's the kind of warmth and personality that comes out. The one thing, though, that I found disappointing in Charlie's win, which I think is outstanding, is that he worked so hard to create a team of all of his cabinet officials and a running team. So he knew when he went into this very difficult job, he would have support people to go in as Attorney General, Treasurer, Auditor, and yet none of those people came in. Why do you think that is? So in other words, we got the top of the ticket, but nobody else. And we had great people.
Again, I think it's, when you look at Massachusetts, typically the constitutional offices have had very little change over the years. They've always remained as a Democrat, stronghold. And even with a strong candidate like Charlie Baker at the top, it wasn't enough to bring down those other layers. Part of the problem happens to be money, because when you have a big race like Charlie Baker's, it leaves those treasurer, auditor, attorney general and stuff like that without a whole lot of funding to go against the incumbents.
Yeah, I was wondering if, and I'd like your opinion on it, did it have more to do with the Martha Coakley negative vote? So people voted the top of the ticket Baker, but then when it came down for the other offices, they just pulled D.
Well, I think one of the other things is that the Republican candidates were not known in this Commonwealth. And that's different from the Democratic nominees, who are all known. And I think that makes a big, big difference.
And plus, the other thing too, let's remember on a few of those, there were some big primaries going on. So for the Democrat Party, so there was commercials going on that end. So you got to see commercials for a lot more sustained period of time, a lot more name recognition, and therefore, you end up voting that direction.
What impact do you think Scott Lively and Evan Falchuk had on the Charlie Baker campaign? Do you think they took away from Baker?
Falchuk definitely, because I know people who voted for him. And didn't he get enough of a percentage now where his party is going to be a legitimate party?
He got, I have it here, 3%.
He got 3%.
Yeah, I
So
could actually, I
think
have the numbers here.
I'm not gonna say he
Falchuk
made-
got 61,600.
Yeah, I don't know if he,
thousand
you know,
votes.
if because of him, Charlie got in or Martha got fewer votes. But I definitely do know a lot of people who voted for him. They were behind him. They liked his message because he was that third party candidate.
Sure.
It gave them another option.
So if you didn't like the Dems, you didn't like
Yeah.
the Republicans, you had Falchuk. Also, Scott Lively was very much for the staunch religious conservatives who take the right to life very seriously and believe that they have to vote that no matter who's running, and they pulled. So I think together they may have pulled more from, which was 4%. I think they may have had more of an impact on Charlie Baker than Martha Coakley, do you think?
Well, I think it was obvious that the race was going to be so close that it could have had an effect, but I think in the end it didn't really have an effect.
So you don't think
I think
they
it
were
was gonna be a
the
close
Tim
race
Cahill?
in the first place.
Yeah, you don't think they were the Tim Cahill spoiler
I don't
at
think
the
so
end?
at all.
I think the Tim Cahill thing was a little bit more blown up. Like, for instance, he had commercials, and you're able to see it. This is a former Democrat going as an independent, more conservative thing. So it was more of an outward against like any sort of conservative Republican candidate. So these ones were less known, and you didn't see any TV time.
Yeah.
I mean, there were only
you
a
know
couple of debates.
Yeah, you know a little bit about them, but you don't know a lot about them. It's a different type of third-party candidate than let's say the Cahill situation.
Nationally, let's go to the larger picture nationally. Nationally, we did outstanding. I don't think there's any dispute on that. Frank, you were talking about the numbers. Could you just repeat them again, what we picked up?
In the Senate, we picked up 7 seats, definite, and there are 3 states that are still in play. Alaska, which looks like the Republicans going to win. Virginia, which looks like it's leaning towards the Democrat,
Yeah.
okay? And then Louisiana, which is going to have a runoff election. So there's a possibility of picking up maybe 2 more.
Sure.
But we've got 7 in the Senate. We have 246 seats in the House, which is the most that we've ever had in the House. We picked up a number of governors throughout the country, including Massachusetts and Maryland, which were strict, blue states in the past, right?
Wow.
And also, was it Ohio? I think it was the other one. I think it was Ohio. Right now, we have 32 governors nationally that are Republicans. So it's a big shift in the state houses of the country, as well as the legislature.
Why? Referendum against, I'll use that term again, Obama?
This one I would agree with you on, more so than it was the Deval Patrick. This one, I think we saw an apathetic president, leading by inaction, and I think a lot of people want to see a lot more leadership at the top, at least on a lot of the big issues, instead of pushing, all the initiatives that. It's like people are still underemployed, and that's a big issue right now. Like, they might have jobs, but they also have like 3 jobs part-time, you know what I mean? So it's not like something that they can go home. It's like they want a little ease up on it, you know what I mean? Or there's a lot of people that are, seeking benefits that could get jobs, and that's the other thing too. So, with a stagnant economy like this that we know has been better, when you take how it was 10 years ago, no one's saying like, wow, I'm doing great, compared to 10 years ago. And that's what I think the people were doing. It's like, you had a vision, you had a lot of hope. Now we actually want, something that's going to be moving the country a lot better.
Do you think he had a lot of vision, he had a lot of hope? I think we can all look at that and say, those are just words that came out at us, hope and change, back in 2008. Do you think that brought up an anger in people that was reflected in this election? Or do you think it was, we have several things. Economics, which I think you just touched on, national security, the growth of ISIS right under the nose of Washington, healthcare, Obamacare, it's putting people out of work. Everybody's healthcare costs are going up, there's no doubt about that. Perceived incompetence of the Obama administration, red lines that are drawn that aren't capped on the international map, it's really bringing a lot of discredit to our country. Or do you think it's just a combination of everything and people are just angry?
I think he just fell short of what he promised. People thought he was going to be this great leader and things were going to change and everything was going to be better. And then he got into office and I think people realized that this wasn't what they expected. I think he did too many of the social welfare things. I mean, everyone wants health care, and everyone wants everyone to be taken care of, but I think at the expense of security, at the expense of border security. And I just think his ideology overtook him, and I think it was just more than people wanted. And they said, wait a minute, let's put the brakes on this.
So you really do think this was, Dan?
I don't think this was about Obama at all.
Really?
I think this was about the people's feeling about the Senate and the House. They've been at the lowest level they have ever been in the history of this country. And I think they said, wait a minute, we have got to stop this inaction in Washington. And their choice was to go Republican. I mean, I think we're all surprised by the numbers that changed. I mean, the House numbers were fantastic change in the House. But I think people finally said something's got to be done, and this is what it's going to be. We're going to change the Congress. I really think it was more about the feelings about Congress than it was about the president.
And yet, when you look, Congress does not have, as a whole, a good approval rating.
No,
So,
the Republicans-
so you think that is
but
like,
the
I just want to
Republicans
take
had
them out and put in the new
But the
guy.
Republicans had a horrible approval rating, so why would people vote more in?
Well, I think they're, like Dan said, they were just looking for a change, and the
change.
Republicans gave them that alternative. But I will, honestly say that if the Republicans don't start making some big changes within the next 2 years, come the presidential cycle, they'll be voted right back out again.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think also you have to realize that people are not stupid. They happen to be very smart, just like we are very smart. And they looked at this thing and said, they started out with a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. And he couldn't do anything with them.
Right.
So why should we go back to that again? The way to go is to the Republican side, and let's see if it works that way.
Well, when you look at that, Obama really, from 2008, when he got elected for the first time, to 2010, really squandered his first 2 years.
Absolutely.
He had the golden ticket to do anything he wanted, and he concentrated on one thing, which was not in the nation's best interest necessarily.
Right.
And yet that's really all we got done. And so what happened? People voted started to vote in a change.
That's what I think happened.
Well, why did they vote him back in?
He's going to have a challenge in the next 2 years. I mean, the thing is, he's going to have to work with Congress now, and this is something he never had to do before. When he was voted in, remember, he ran as the anti-George Bush. I mean, it wasn't, basically, he was represented everything that that old administration was, and bringing things forward. Even when you look at Clinton came in when he got elected. He was supposedly the bridge builder. I could work with both sides, and for all intents and purposes, he did. I mean, we might not have liked it. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but he gave a little bit. When Obama got elected, he didn't have to make amends. So we're going to have to see him shifting gears quite a bit, and it could be a very negative stain on the Democrat Party if he still keeps going on the way he went about his business the past 6 years, where he didn't have to. So this is going to be quite an interesting 2 years.
Well, what about his press conference yesterday? He basically challenged his new Republican leadership in the Senate and the House, and he kind of went back to his old penance and phone mantra that if I don't like it, there were going to be things, and I think people could interpret that as being immigration, that I will do myself. I will take on and do myself with my pen and my cell phone. How do you think that's going to play in Peoria, as they say in D.C.?
Well, it's that shows his true attitude, is that no matter how much he talks about working with the Republicans, he's going to try to push his agenda, and it's going to put the Democrats in a tough spot. It really is. 2 more years, because if he continues along that path and nothing happens, he's going to be seen. The Democrats are going to be seen as the pure obstructionist in this next election. So,
what do you think some of the first things that we'll see getting done now that we've got a Republican Congress? Do you think we'll see some movement in what?
a budget.
A budget?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, that's what the Senate is required to do.
Yeah.
And that's job one, and they've not done it for 8 years
8
now.
years.
6
Yeah.
years.
Maybe get some of those 300 bills off the desk and
that have
get
been,
them on.
that Harry
Yeah.
Reid
Yeah,
has
get
been
them
sort
onto
of
the
sitting
floor
on.
for a vote. Yeah.
Keystone, what do you think?
I hope so. We need it for energy independence.
I think the the House and the Senate are going to move on Keystone.
Yeah.
And they're going to get terrible opposition from the president because the president just doesn't want it.
And the
But-
environmentalists.
And the environmentalists, yeah.
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 But do you think we'll get it through?
Oh, I think it'll pass. Whether it gets
Signed.
it gets signed is
Sure.
another
Yeah.
story.
But then if it doesn't get signed and people look at that as it's being developed as a job creator, and it doesn't get signed and it's stopped by President Obama at the final end because he won't sign it, won't that will land
Yeah.
right on his shoulders
Right.
and his leadership.
Yeah, it'll make his base happy, but the majority of the American people, I think, are going to want more action.
I was going to say, the interesting thing is, he's going to have that power of that veto. And, he has to use that wisely. You just can't veto everything
Veto
coming down
everything,
there.
no.
So he's going to, and as I said before, he's going to have to bridge build somewhere. And it'll be interesting to see where he builds that bridge, or, if he's able to reach out to the Republicans in a way that, he can compromise. You know what I mean?
One of the things that was kind of interesting is just before the election, maybe within the last several weeks, we heard that, I think it was Harvard did a study, that the young millennials, it's a little redundant, but the millennials are really turning away from the Democratic Party. And yet that was a party that the Dems really, or a group that the Dems really thought they had sewed up, that they could count on this youth vote. But it seems that they either are turning away from the Dems, not necessarily voting Republican, but not voting Democratic. What do you think about that? Is that a group we can pick up, or why do you think they've become disenchanted?
I think if you look at some of the candidates that won in the Massachusetts, Kate Campanelli, 28 years old. Stephanie Fatman, 26 years old. Ryan Fatman, 30 years old. It kind of gives you a sense that maybe some of these younger voters are now looking at the Republican Party and becoming active in the Republican Party.
And just to add to that, we had 2 races in our own area. Garrett Chetrowski out in Gardner lost by 33 points.
33 points.
Right.
And Mike Valenzola out a little farther west in Wales.
Wales, yeah.
And he lost also, but just by a narrow margin.
Right.
So,
Right.
and he's 30.
30.
So,
But wasn't there a young woman in upstate New York,
18.
20 years old or 19
There
or
was an
something like that?
18-year-old.
Yeah.
And then you had Mia Love in Utah.
Yeah.
So I think the younger people are starting to realize that maybe the Republican Party is the way to go.
I think the thing is reality set in. When you're going to school and you get your college education and you're leaving and you're moving back home with your parents, and this is the norm. This isn't.
It is.
This isn't.
these aren't outliers.
I mean, this isn't the exception where it used to be. Like even when I was growing up, you go to school, get out, get a job, live out on your own,
Move
get some
away,
roommates.
sure.
It's very difficult to do that now, and I think the millennials are looking at it like, hey, how come I'm not getting everything that I thought I would be when I was promised when I was going to get my college education, and it's a very difficult road for them. And I think they want to see that needle pushed, because they're feeling it just as much as everybody else.
Well, the very high debt that they're coming out of schools with, and then inability to find jobs is just demoralizing. That's a time in your life when you're 21 and you just got this college education, you want to get out and sort of spread your wings with everything you've learned. And we're finding that we're not going anywhere with these young people. Let's just talk about the ballot questions. Because in Massachusetts, we were very interested in the ballot questions, especially number 1, the gas tax. Frank, you were especially involved in that. What do you think about the win on that one?
I think it's fantastic because anytime you have a state legislature that all of a sudden dictates that they do not have to listen to the will of the voters every time they raise the taxes, it's, I hate to say it, but it's what we fought our revolution for. Okay, is we want people to stand up and be counted. If they're going to raise my taxes, let me know who's voting to raise my taxes, and that way I can decide if I want to vote for them or not. And that was the big issue, is that automatic increase. It should have never been voted in. My biggest fear is if that had stood, why not do it with a sales tax? We'll have the sales tax go up automatically.
Any tax.
Any tax,
Well,
right, exactly, any
the
tax.
bottle bill, which
The bottle bill was,
that,
yeah.
now that
Yeah.
was slated to do the same. So not only was it going to be a tax on everybody, but the bottle bill was, to my knowledge, that was also going to be raised.
Every 5 years, it could go
Routinely.
up,
Yeah.
Yeah. the people who are supporting the bottle bill says, well, that's an option, that it can go up. But have you ever seen?
When has anybody ever not exercised the options they've just given themselves?
No one's ever seen a temporary tax increase, you know?
Well, yeah, I was really happy about the bottle bill. Now I'd like to put up a bill where you can get rid of the bottle bill altogether and not even recycle soda and beer bottles.
Well, no, we recycle, but it's a curbside recycling that we all have now throughout the Commonwealth.
I mean, if people are going to throw their bottles and cans on the side of the road, they're going to do it regardless of whether or not they're losing 5 cents.
Yeah. Sick time, quickly. The sick time for the...
I think that was inevitable. I think that was inevitable. People feel that that's something that's necessary for people to have, and the people at the lower end of the scale who don't have it, I think it was one of those things that people just felt was necessary. I think it should be run by the market. I think the marketplace should determine those things. But I certainly can understand how people felt about that.
Yeah, I knew that one was going to pass because, you know, when you leave it up to the people and all that. But the problem I had with it is, you know, running a restaurant and, you know, looking at it on that level, that's very tough to do. And payroll's like so tough to meet now. And, you know, I'm looking at it for the small business, and that's going to severely affect it. And, you know, Massachusetts has not been friendly to those startup and, well, technology startups they're favorable for, but, you know, for the most part, mom and pop stores, you know, it's just going to leave a big burden on them.
Well, guess what? Our half hour is over. Our 30 minutes is over on our election recap. I really want to thank you all for joining us tonight on Your Right to Know, and this is going to show this month, so this is a timely show that we hit right on target. And while I'm saying goodnight to my friends, I'd like to thank you all for watching Your Right to Know and sitting in with the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. And as we leave you, I want you to remember that your local city and town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your constitutional rights and conservative values. We encourage you to join us. Why? Because we in the Fitchburg GOP and the GOP all nationwide, we always stand for freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and